Hi there, SLA. I have been invited to give a talk today about how librarians can level the playing field for the general public. This is a project that I did several years ago, and we worked with the regional jails and the public libraries, and I wanted to tell you more about it today. We did research on this topic. My name first is Jill Ellern, the systems librarian at Western Carolina University. I've been there for a number of years, and this is a project from 7 years ago, but I think it has some applications for today. I've looked at some of my screens and re-energized what I've talked about at the time to appeal to this audience. And so let me tell you about what we did. First, I'll first tell you about why we did the project and what prompted it. Talked about how we prepared for the interviews and the research and the service opportunities that we had. Go in depth a little bit about our two regional jails that I worked with specifically, and the Fontana Regional Library, which helped us with that project. Talk a little bit about some of the negotiations and challenges and some pictures and how that went about. And encourage you to think about doing this yourself. So let's get started. So this project started because myself and a friend who's a criminal justice faculty member, we've been friends for a number of years, and we were over a beer talking about saying what faculty that get together often do is we should do some research together. And we spent some quality time trying to figure out what that might be, what that would look like. And we both had been working, me particularly had been working on the idea of the Boyer Model Scholarship. And if you don't know what that is, that's part of its lore, if you will, is to encourage educational institutions like what we're in to work with the community to do projects and involvement to apply the scholarship we do in the institution to what might be out in the field. And we were trying to kind of combine both of those ideas. And as we started thinking about how our libraries and criminal justice combine, we talked about a couple of our friends that were jailers in the area. And it just seemed like a great idea to think about how we could work on this kind of project together. And we came up with this jail project. And so as we mused about what we could do, we listened to the stories that our friends told us, the jailers, and mused about, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we were locked up all day with nothing to do but read. And we found in our project, during the course of our project, that ideal was not very true. The reality of the situation was much different than we imagined. And as we experimented and looked and talked to the people, we found out that you could actually be in a jail for up to 2 years, even before you went into court. And so this appeal became less and less attractive. And as we worked on the project, we tried to figure out how we could make this better for the inmates. So we mused about what we could do. We spent quite a bit of time on that topic, and we even spent the time as we talked to the regional jails. We knew that there was 7 of them in our general area of Western North Carolina, and we spent some time trying to figure out where they were and who was in charge and who we needed to talk to that we could figure out. We wanted to know what the actual situation, I mean, we'd heard from our friends, but we wanted to see it for ourselves and look and see what was going on there. we concentrating a little, at least in the initial parts of asking, well, all the sheriffs, but also the public libraries in the area, the things that they might need that we could do to help improve the situation as we found it. And we also wanted to do some more research so we didn't look as stupid or crazy, because we didn't want to stir up trouble with these people, thinking that academics are trying to stir up trouble or on a campaign. We wanted to really concentrate on what might be needed by these folks to improve the lives of the inmates in particular, but concentrating on what kind of library services these folks had. And so we did our background research. We spent some time before we even looked at the, talked to the people themselves so that we didn't look stupid. And because we're good academics and we were interested in this topic. So we spent some time figuring out, for instance, the difference between a jail and a prison and where they were, and their processes of what they did. Many people don't know that there is a big difference, especially in Western North Carolina, and who administrates them and how they operate. We identified all the sheriffs and who we needed to speak with, and set up appointments, and went out to talk to them. We also went out while we were in the area to talk to the public libraries and the head librarians at each of the public libraries that serve those areas. And one of the things that we found out as we worked on this project is that we were really smart in that we were concentrating on the items themselves, the library materials, and not the inmates. We were interested in the library resources that are offered to those inmates. And that made all the difference in how we were perceived by the administration, and how much we got to see, and what we were able to do with the project. And so that's one of the tips that I would say: concentrate on the materials, and you will get quite far. We were also considering the longevity of this project. We were hoping that this would have some sustainability and impact. We were concerned about those books getting in their hands, but we also wanted to understand the uniqueness of Western North Carolina. We wanted to concentrate on identifying areas that might be good for grant writing, encouraging the regional libraries to think about them, the inmates, as their patrons, which although they knew, this brought it into their forefront. And so that helped. And there's some unique challenges with each of them. Some of them had some baggage about working with each other that we ran into as well. And while I don't think this has sustained over time, it is a process that you have to continually go back to the well and remind folks as personnel changes, as inmates change, as the environment changes. And so that's part of what I'm doing here today, is encouraging you to think about this as a project. So we got together and we came up with these 6 questions that we asked. We try to keep it simple with a couple follow-up questions, so that if they only had a yes or no question or answered, we had some follow-ups. And so we asked questions like, tell us about the history of it, if they knew it, the role it played in the philosophy of the jail, and what it meant to the people. Where did they get their materials? How often did they check them out? The administrative concerns, what was their points of pressure, that kind of thing. How did they deal with inmates that either were illiterate or had special needs or special languages? Did they support those with materials? And how they provided legal material to the inmates, and got some different answers on each of these, and it was really interesting. So let me show you the results. So the collections themselves, as we looked at them, were primarily paperback. Um, jails as themselves deal mostly with paperbacks. They feel the hardbacks can be used for nefarious purposes, so paperbacks are the most important things. They're predominantly fiction. We found a lot of romance, a lot of popular fiction, things that were in various shapes of use. Discarding older stuff, duplicate copies of things sometimes. This is stuff you might find at a thrift store. And we've all been to thrift stores and found what books they had, and it's a vast variety and stuff that may be popular at the time. We saw very few self-help books or nonfiction. That nonfiction that there was more historical type things, not self-help. And when we asked where they bought them, most of the people mentioned donations and friends and family of inmates. Sometimes they were allowed to bring things in, but not often. The staff themselves went to thrift stores and bought stuff at yard sales because they really had no budget to buy books. Books were a secondary item, although very important in many of them, the organizations, and they felt strongly about having them, but they didn't have a budget. When we looked at where these things were housed, most of them were housed in areas left over. They were not specifically library areas. A couple of them were multi-purpose rooms that had a bookshelf in them, many closet areas, a lot of carts so they could move them around the jail easily. We even had one instance where a locker was used. We'll see a picture of that in a minute. We talked about the loan rules, and 2 to 4 books was real common, 3 being the most common, but the Bible didn't count. We could keep that. In some of the jails, there was some community space where people could share books. So even though there was 2 to 4 books at a time, they could share them with their friends, depending on what was going on. And getting things that were different or on a subject was very difficult. Very few allowed people to buy it on Amazon or things. Prisons are more likely to have that than jails. Jails, you kind of deal with what they've got. Some of the issues that we found immediately was the physical state of the collections. I think we'll see that in the pictures. There was a variety of genres, but mostly, as I mentioned, romance and young adult, and multiple copies of some popular things. The Twilight series was real popular, so there were a couple copies of that. There was budgetary challenges for everyone and space limitations to store these books, so they need to be compact and easily moved around as need and interest. And there was a limited amount of time and staff resources to spend on improving this service. And as we mentioned, there was a general lack of items that were useful for those with special needs. And we found a vast difference of opinion on whether the institution itself, the jail, was responsible for providing any materials that were legal in nature, although the 2 bigger ones did have a small legal collection. And that's one of the things we concentrated on, and I'll show you some pictures that we did on that. So onward to the pictures, because a picture is worth 1,000 words here. So this is Macon County, or Jackson County, excuse me. They have this small book truck. When I first started visiting them, it looked pretty nice. You'll see how it turned out later. They have a maximum of 72 people that could be in the jail itself. So they carted this around. I'll get into particulars about Jackson County and Macon County and how they're different, but this gives you a look at the first initial. Later, we went back and you can see their little closet that started accumulating books and not very much order. They were just bought by the volunteer. Macon County, which we worked with a lot, started out with this one book truck and a couple boxes of books. You can kind of see the age of the books and what we're talking about with the small collection. Haywood County is a bit bigger. They had an actual multi-purpose room. That's what you're seeing here on one wall. They used to, at one time, have some ED education, so they had a bit more books than what you might expect from their GED program that was defunct. But they did have a small cart that they moved around. Let me give you a look at, so you can get a real look at the idea of the quality we're talking about, and that these books were literally loved to death and also written on, and an idea of what we're talking about. They had this small collection of the North Carolina statutes, just a couple volumes. Clay County, which by far, if I were stuck in a library or in a jail with this library, I would definitely want to be in Macon County. Looks like they spent some time with actually having a checkout system. You notice that there's kits and some puzzles that they had and some GED stuff. So if I were to, this is where I'd want to be, because they had quite a collection, although aged. It looked like they really felt some sense of ownership, the jail did, and how important it was to their inmates' well-being. They had it in a closet area, but as a cart, as you saw in the previous one, it could move around. Cherokee County, which is in the further part of the state, also had a multi-purpose room with several big shelves. Although you can see towards the bottom here, there was some duplicates of some things. But their collection was pretty newer, I'd say. But that was it for the 150 max inmates. They had another one on the other side. So they had a pretty good sized collection, and they had a little shelf as well, but I think these are more Bible study classes. And you can see that this doubled this room as multi-purpose. And they had a video for inmates to talk to the lawyers without actually leaving the jail. It was a newer jail, and we got a full tour. Graham County was the smallest of the counties, and this locker really is all of the books that they had available. Now, they don't have a lot of inmates. At the maximum, they have 8 people in jail, and we spoke quite a bit of time to the sheriff of that. But this is their collection. The black book on top was a Bible that they could pull out, but I think they just pulled one out and drew it to inmate. So after we did our initial article, we spent some time further. Myself worked with Fontana Regional, and one of the librarians had a special interest in working with the jails. And so I worked with her quite extensively, Liz Gregg, and she's since moved on, but we worked particularly with Macon County Jail and Jackson County. Swain County is also one of the detention centers that is in the region for Fontana, but they had an incident with one of their inmates, and so we're not really talking to anyone outside the jail system. So they declined to work with us. I want to talk a little bit about the different approaches, because I think it kind of illustrates, even in the same region, how the sheriff and the jailers can have a difference of how they deal with their inmates, even if they're in the same region. So when we talked to Jackson County sheriff, he emphasized the philosophy of safety and security his inmates were in their cells most of the time and didn't socialize a lot, and that the services that its library provided were more about keeping them safe and secure. Whereas when we spoke philosophy with the Macon County, he was more interested in the stewardship, that they only had them for a short time and making sure they were still integrated into the society. In fact, one of the things he emphasized was that he wanted to make sure that they had local newspapers so they would know what was going on in the region, because they would get out, that they were a short time. That's what jails are about, short time. And so they were only there for a little while to keep them. Who ran it was a little different too. In Jackson County, they had a single nurse volunteer that was very interested in providing this services, and was the person who bought books herself out of her own budget. She had a religious crusade that she worked on, and so they let her purchase and house a lot of materials that strictly would be envious on some libraries, but were definitely purchased with a certain perception in mind as it was created there. Whereas Macon County was more a group collection. The jailers all dealt with collecting books and helping them and giving them to the inmates, and the inmates had a more interactive. They also worked more in a general collection. I mean, they had a common area so they could share books and that kind of thing, even though they checked out. I want to say checked out. They had in their possession 2 to 4 books. With the common area, they could share those. With Jackson County, that wasn't true at all. They were given a list of what books they had, so somebody had to create that list, and so they picked from the list that was on that cart or in that genre, and were given to them in their cells. So they had no way to browse, and even though the collection was quite larger than Macon County, creating that list was much more important to them, and something that I worked with the public library to help them make that list more user-friendly. We'll see a little bit more about that in a minute. Macon County, because those little carts moved around and they could pile books in, and all the jailers talked, it was more varied and accessible. So as time went on, and I worked with Jackson County Public Library and our volunteer nurse. You saw the first one. This is later on. She was given a closet and was collecting books as she purchased them and threw them in there. And that's part of what Jackson County Public Library helped with, is going through those books and putting them in order and helping a little with that process. Macon County, I think they still had the boxes, but they added another book cart and moved it around, and you see that pretty much filled up the cart. A little better look. You see the quality of this is better than what we saw at Haywood County. The public library would come in and trade out books and throw out the old used up ones. One of the things that I talked about with Fontana, and they agreed with, was that these inmates were really their patrons. They were citizens of the counties in which they served. And so the process of providing these library services to them was important to them. And so they went into that closet, pulled out books, and began working with creating that connection so that they could talk to them, but also worked on some publicity. We did some newspaper things. Western Carolina University did a publicity on our project and working with that. And we were on the radio in Jackson County, and they began getting donations both from the Jackson Friends of the Library, but also this person as well. Not her, this is a student helping, but also the volunteer nurse. we investigated how to make that list that Jackson County needed. And so after communicating with Library Thing, they actually gave us a free account that has quite a bit of resources to do genres and printing. And so we were even able to create a wish list of the things that if we had money, that's what we'd want to do. And so we were thinking about working on creating some ways that people could donate to buy particular titles. Just stepping back a little bit, it's important to think about the negotiations that go on as you work with a jail. There's a variety of organizational landscape dynamics that you need to think about on who's in charge, and that it's a partnership, and to concentrate on those end results of the materials and the patrons. There's a lot of support and politics that goes on with materials, especially considering that librarians in general feel that censorship is a bad thing, whereas, for instance, the jails don't. They control a lot of different things, and including what they read. And so that creates that challenge about what that means to be a librarian in an organization that believes in censorship, for instance. They don't, as I mentioned, don't provide hardback because they're worried about the safety and security of using the cardboard in the actual jails. But there's also some issues about subject area of what they should be reading and not reading. Although I would say that some of the romances today have a lot more sex than you think. If there's specific sex things, they don't allow it. They don't read the books themselves, but anything that is blatantly sexual definitely is not going to be allowed in the jail. Consequently, also things that deal with violence or gang stuff, that type of stuff is definitely not allowed. So that's kind of interesting to think about as well. And I wanted to talk about being a librarian in this situation, that we know what that means, but the jailers consider anybody who deals with a pile of books as being a librarian type person. And so I want to reiterate that having a pile of books does not make you a librarian. And we spend a lot of time in that advocacy part of it, educating what that means to us, and realizing that their safety viewpoint is just as valid as ours. And you have to give up a lot of this control. You give the books, you know they're going to be loved and used to death and torn up, and they get munched and used, but know that they are loved to death, and that's a good thing. And so that they're expendable. They may walk away with the person, that's okay. You give them more. It's a population that needs this and uses it. And that those personalities definitely dictate the environment that you're working in. There's also, as we mentioned before, the crusaders in general. The jailers themselves deal with the importance of officer safety and jail safety much more than the librarians, which are dealing with the materials, but it is not your place or their place to look at the inmates. They're more concerned about the overall stuff. And so that takes a little bit to get used to in this environment. As I mentioned, the nurse had a religious agenda. She was definitely purchasing things as part of her tithing for her religious endeavors. And so this colored what she did, what she bought, that type of thing. There didn't seem to be a place, and I wish there was, and that's where I guess my crusade is, to work on the social justice part of it, to look at what was there for their mental health, for keeping them out of jail in the future, for giving them skills when they left, and that piece is solely lacking in this case. And that's where I think a lot of advocacy can happen for the future. And so, did we play a part? I want to mention that this went on for about 1.5 years. Um, uh, a lot of changes happened both in the public library and in the jail. There was some abuses of the systems. I think they had an inmate at Macon County run away and do bad things, and so this was seen as a way to clamp down. They do clamp down when problems happen. They had shift changes, different sheriffs, which changes the process. In Jackson County, they had, I think, 2 inmates actually die. And so that changed how they deal with outside agencies specifically. And so because of all that turmoil, it's hard to figure out how to continue to work with them unless the organization itself has a way to continually go back to them and reevaluate that relationship again and again and again. And so that's what you have to do, keep those relationships going. And that there's really no place to donate materials unless the library itself does that. But money, that thing is definitely needed to be earmarked to continue that process, and that would help recreate those environments, and that's what I'm encouraging you to think about. I wanted to give a couple pictures about what we did accomplish so that I can walk back and say that Western Carolina University had upgraded 2 copies. They had one in the public area, one in the law library, law area, and had 2 full runs. You can see the number of books there of the North Carolina statutes, which because we'd upgraded ours, we gave a copy to the Cherokee County Detention Center and to the Haywood County Detention Center. And we actually had a group of people, a faculty member in the criminal, another different faculty member, and the 3 people on the 2 people on that side on the Haywood County were the librarians in Haywood County Public Library who had never been in the jail before, so we were able to walk them in there. And the lady in the white and black was actually a reporter that talked about what we'd done. So that kind of was pretty cool. Conclusions, again, I encourage you to think about providing this kind of emphasis to talk to your public library or work with them to remember to think about inmates as public library patrons. This is a small group of folks who really appreciate anything that you can give them that improves the kind of books that we're talking about here. They're dedicated, but they do use the books up. In some ways that's great, but some ways that's not. It's not as sustaining. It's not the kind of library we're used to seeing. And it's very rewarding. Even after we got some publicity, we got emails from folks talking about how much those materials affected the people who used them. And it's a very rewarding process. And lastly, to remember all the challenges. There's political challenge, there's COVID going on right now, there's health issues, there's the changing over, there's all those things that are happening, but keep after it. If you want more about this process during the period of time I was doing it, I kept a blog. This is the address. We, after the first initial interviewing of the sheriffs, my co-worker, our co-investigator, Karen Mason, and I wrote an article for North Carolina Magazine, and that's a link to it. You can find that and check it out if you want to learn more. And so I want to leave you with this quote. I'll leave you to read it, that the books don't care who they are. It just talked to me about how important those things were to people and why I keep after it and keep on talking about it even years later. It's important work, and it has a great impact. And I leave you with reminding you that even Martin Luther King, who spent time in jail, spent time reading in jail. And so, thank you very much for your attention. I hope this inspires you to think about providing services to the jails in your region. Thank you.